No one sane trades two living beings for a glass of fermented frostberry ale, unless they're running from something far worse than slavery. And no one sane accepts that trade, unless they're completely out of options too. The wind howled, like a wounded beast across the icy plains of Valtrex 7. Snow fell in crystalline sheets, slicing sideways through the dusk. It was the kind of cold that got into your bones and whispered that you didn't belong here, not unless you were desperate or dangerous. Commander Cale Varys pulled his coat tighter around him, frost creeping up his gauntlets. He ducked into the ruin of what used to be a traveler's outpost, now reduced to broken beams and scattered synth glass. The only light came from a flickering fire pit and a sagging generator humming its last breath. The drunk sat slouched in a rusted chair, cupping a bottle of low-grade frostberry liquor like it was a newborn. Cale nearly turned back, until he saw the two figures kneeling beside the fire, motionless, huddled close for warmth, their pale silver skin dusted with snowflakes. Twins, identical, alien, stunning. They wore high-born slave leathers, decorative, impractical, ceremonial. An old custom from the eastern moons of Lys Arian, where daughters were dressed like trophies for their buyers. Yet their eyes, glowing with inner light, held no fear. Only calculation. The drunk slurred. "You like 'em? Lys Arian twins. Rare stuff. Stole 'em from the last auction on Rekath. Ain't nobody looking for 'em." He held out a trembling hand. "One bottle, you walk out with 'em both." Cale glanced down at the twins again. Their lips were turning blue from the cold. They didn't even flinch when the drunk touched one's hair. He reached into his coat, pulled out his emergency canteen of frostberry, and tossed it into the drunk's lap. The bottle hadn't even stopped rolling before Cale barked, "Get up." The twins rose without hesitation, stepping toward him with eerie, synchronized grace. They looked at him like they already belonged to him, and something in his chest twisted unexpectedly. A week later, Cale regretted everything. Not the rescue, not the drink, just how complicated things had gotten. He hadn't meant to keep them. He told himself he'd drop them off at the next port, find them shelter, or even sign the ownership papers to a rights organization. But every night they stayed. Every day they followed him, without question, without fear. Their names were Velarii and Nisari, and they spoke little. But they listened to everything, watched everyone, always alert. "You saved us," Velarii said once, her voice like ice cracking. "Where you go, we follow. That is the bond." Cale had seen battle-hardened mercs with less loyalty. But it wasn't the bond that worried him. It was the unspoken question burning in Nisari's violet eyes. As if she were waiting for him. To break, to reveal some deeper motive. They weren't helpless either. When a group of raiders cornered Cale outside a trader depot on the mineral moon of Syraxa, Velarii moved like a blade of light. Her hands, once bound, snapped necks. Nisari gutted a pirate with one of Cale's own combat knives, then calmly wiped it clean before offering it back. "What? Were you before?" Cale asked that night, as the ship floated in low orbit. Nisari gave him a sharp, cryptic smile. "We were not allowed to be." Meanwhile, across the galaxy, the auction master who had once owned the twins was dead, but his brother wasn't. Lord Cetrin Malrix, head of House Malrix on Lys Arian, had learned the twins had survived. He wanted them back. Not because he cared, but because they were born of prophecy. And prophecy demanded their blood be spilled in the ceremony of ascension. He sent hunters. Quietly. Professionally. Back on the ship. The Frostbite runner. Cale was in the cockpit when the proximity alarm shrieked. 3 vessels, fast, armed, unmarked, were inbound. "Velarii! Nisari!" He yelled, slamming buttons and redirecting power to shields. They were already there, strapping in, their faces cold and emotionless. "Do you know them?" he asked, nodding to the incoming fighters. Valari's lips parted just enough to say, They belong to Malrix. Nisari added, "He's come to reclaim us." "And you think I'll just let that happen?" "You paid one drink," Valari said softly. "But you risked your life. That makes you ours now." She leaned forward, gently placed her hand over his, "And we protect what is ours." They wanted their property back. What they didn't expect was that the human had already become more dangerous than anyone they'd trained. And the twins, they weren't property anymore. The first strike came like a hammer from the dark. A burst of ion fire slammed into the rear stabilizers of the Frostbite runner, spinning the ship end over end toward the cracked wastelands of Nova Crater, a moon-sized scar on a long-dead planet. "Brace!" Kale shouted, dragging Nisari down, as the cockpit cracked under pressure. He twisted the landing thrusters manually, old-school override, high-G burn, slamming the ship into the crater floor like a thrown dagger. Snow and ash erupted on impact. The runner screeched to a halt, half buried in ice and rock. Kale unbuckled with a grunt, smoke curling from his shoulder where a console had exploded. "Everyone alive?" "I am," Nisari said, voice steady. "Valari's leg is broken." Valari nodded from the floor, her jaw tight but eyes blazing. "I can walk." "You're not walking on a shattered femur," Kale growled, already kneeling beside her. She tried to push him away. He didn't budge. "Stop fighting me!" "I'm not weak," she hissed. "No," he said, meeting her gaze. "You're not. But you're not alone either." She blinked once and let him set the bone. Her fingers dug into his jacket, claws piercing fabric, but she didn't scream. When he was done, she looked at him like she'd never seen him before. Above them, the hunter ships, circling the Malrix strike team, disembarked with perfect formation. 7 elites, armored in obsidian alloy, their visors glowing blue. One held a data slate with Kale's bounty already half paid, dead or alive. They found the crash site. They spread in a pincer formation. They thought this would be clean. Back. In the crater, snow fell again, lightly this time, like the world was trying to pretend there wasn't blood waiting to be spilled. Kale led them through a jagged canyon of ice, carrying Valari on his back. Nisari scouted ahead, barefoot and silent. Her eyes shone brighter here, like she was meant for this. "You need to leave us," Valari murmured near his ear. "You could still escape." "You don't know me very well," Kale said. "I know you risked your life for 2 strangers. Now you're not strangers." Valari was quiet for a long time. Then she leaned her head against his shoulder and whispered, "We are not used to kindness. It's hard to believe it's real. You'd better get used to it." First contact. The lead hunter found Nisari first. Big mistake. He lunged from cover, plasma blade humming. She didn't run. She flowed. Sidestep, twist, upward strike. His arm hit the ground before his body did. She buried her knife in his throat and was gone before the second hunter even turned. By the time Kale arrived, there were 3 bodies and 1 breathing. Heavy. "Remind me not to piss her off," he muttered. "She was bred to kill," Valari said quietly, "but never allowed to protect." "She's not your sister, is she?" Valari didn't answer. Final stand, top of the ridge. They reached a high outcropping above the ice fields. No cover, no exit, just sky and cold and death coming fast. 6. Hunters left. Valari, still wounded, took a blaster. "I'll buy you time." "No," Kale said, grabbing her hand. "We do this together." She looked at him. "Why?" "Because I chose you." Nisari returned, covered in blood, eyes wild. "They're coming. Formation tactics. They want to capture, not kill." "Let's change their minds," Kale said grimly. The battle. It was chaos and silence, explosions and breath. Kale moved like a soldier who had nothing left to lose, because for once he had something to protect. Valari took 2 down with precision shots before her weapon melted in her hand. Nisari fought with teeth and blade, every motion a whisper of rage and skill, but they were still outnumbered. Kale took a shot to the ribs and dropped. Valari screamed, a sound so raw it made Nisari freeze mid-attack. Two hunters rushed them. Valari crawled to Kale's body, fingers trembling as she touched his face. No, you don't die for us. You don't. His eyes opened, barely. I'm not dead yet. She laughed, a sharp, broken sound, then leaned down and kissed him. Snowflakes melted on their lips. Behind them, Nisari unleashed a scream. Of fury. Not a weapon. Not an assassin. A sister, protecting something sacred. She killed the last two hunters herself. Aftermath. Later, as they wrapped Kale's ribs and huddled inside a hidden cave of volcanic ice, Valari sat close to him. You shouldn't have kissed me, he murmured. You shouldn't have saved me. Silence. Then she added, But I'm glad you did both. Nisari, seated near the fire, gave a soft nod. You are not like others. You didn't buy us. You saw us. Valari leaned against him again. They'll send more. They always do. Then we'll fight more, Kale said. Together. Kale was no king, no chosen one. Just a broken man trying to survive. But when the lost royals of a shattered empire crown you in fire and frost, you don't walk away. Snowstorms and secrets. The cave beneath Nova Crater wasn't just a shelter, it was old. Older than the war. Older than the empire. Carved with symbols that glowed faintly when Nisari touched them. Kyle sat, ribs tightly bound, watching her as she pressed her hand to the stone. What is this place? He asked. Nisari turned. Slowly, violet eyes reflecting firelight. This is where it began, where the Sindari royal line made its final stand. Valari stood beside a frozen dais, her hand resting on the arm of a broken throne carved of salt and obsidian ice. And where it might begin again, she whispered. Kale blinked. Wait, you said you were bred to serve nobles. Not that you were bred, Nisari snapped, stepping closer, tone suddenly sharp. We weren't bred. We were the nobility. Hidden, scattered. Experimented on by our own empire when they feared we might reclaim it. Valari's eyes met his. They erased our names, called us weapons. But we remember. Kale stood slowly. So you're not. Just two runaway girls I saved from a drunk? Nisari laughed, bitter and low. You didn't save us, you freed us. Flashback. The fall of House. Aziriel in a whispered hush, the flames reflected in Valari's eyes as she told him the truth. House Aziriel, rulers of the Sindari core worlds, had been betrayed by their inner council during the Purge. Loyalists slaughtered, children taken, sisters separated and tested, injected with forbidden DNA to create hybrid soldiers. Nisari had killed for them. Valari had been bound in chains of silence, enduring procedures meant to strip her empathy. But they'd escaped, barely, and when they found each other again on that dying world's edge, they'd promised never again. Never captured, never broken. And then the crowning. When Kale walked to the throne, he wasn't trying to take power. He only wanted to understand. I'm not one of you, he said. I'm just a mechanic with a dead past and a beat-up ship. Valari stepped down from the dais. You stood when others ran, fought when we told you to leave. That's what we used to call a ruler. Nisari placed a single shard of obsidian in his hand, ancient, heavy, humming with resonance. By Sindari law, she said, he who sits upon the throne of salt and ice and survives the mocking flame shall be called consort kin. I'm not royalty, Kale repeated. You don't have to be, Valari said, stepping close. You're ours. The flame trail atop the throne, the ice cracked beneath his boots. A ring of violet-blue fire burst around him, climbing up the walls in runes. Pain sliced through him like light. Visions of past rulers, war, betrayal, loss. He screamed, but he endured. When it ended, smoke curled from his skin. His eyes burned, gold for a moment, before fading. Nisari dropped to one knee. Valari followed. Kale stared at them, stunned. "What the hell just happened?" Valari smiled. "You passed. You're a Sindari now," Nisari said. "I didn't agree to this." Kyle coughed, still smoking slightly. Valari reached out and touched his cheek. "Then let this be your choice." She kissed him, not in desperation, not in pain, but in ceremony. And when she pulled away, her voice shook. By name and by fire. "You are my mate." Not everyone was happy about that. A tremor shook the cave, then another. Outside, storm winds howled unnaturally, churning in black spirals. "Someone else has found us," Nisari said. Valari's face darkened. "It's him." "Who?" Kale asked. "The one who created us," Nisari whispered. "High Ascendant Varuth." The monster approaches Varuth had been royal science minister turned tyrant. He saw the Sindari bloodline as flawed, needing refinement. He'd taken the royal daughters to improve them. He was the one who branded them property, the one who sold them to the drunk, as a joke. Now he wanted his experiments back. Preparing for war, Valari donned armor taken from a fallen hunter. Nisari sharpened her knives, humming a battle hymn only royalty ever knew. Kale stood with a plasma rifle and a patched ribcage. He wasn't special, not a warlord, not enhanced, but he was theirs, and he would die before letting them be taken again. The final oath before night fell. Kale turned to them. "Let me say this once. You're not slaves. You're not weapons. You're not abandoned." Valari touched his chest. "Then what are we?" He placed her hand over his heart. "You're home." Nova Crater split open at dawn. From the red sky descended a gleaming spire, cutting through the clouds like a divine blade. Lightning danced across its surface, and the earth trembled as it touched down. Then he stepped forth, tall, robed in living crystal, skin the color of rotted moons. His eyes glowed like stars that had turned in on themselves. He didn't speak at first. The air around him did, vibrating with impossible syllables that made the wind flinch. Finally, a voice emerged from him. "Return my property." Valari stepped forward, blades unsheathed, humming with charge. Her chin lifted, defiant. "We are not yours." The figure blinked slowly. "You were made by me, born from the ashes of war and perfected through suffering. You are mine in blood and in bond." Kale didn't hesitate. He moved in front of the sisters, gun steady in both hands. "Back off." The alien's gaze settled on him as if noticing a smudge on a perfect mirror. Ah, the contaminant, the soft one, the mistake. He exhaled, and the wind behind Kale screamed. How curious that filth believes it can hold fire. The first shot came from Kale's plasma pistol. It sizzled across the distance and struck the alien's barrier with a crackling flare. But the High Ascendant didn't flinch. With a flick of his wrist, the ground beneath Kale exploded, and he was flung like a rag doll into the rocks. Blood painted his path. "Kale!" Nisari moved instinctively, but Valari caught her arm. "No," she said, breathing hard. "If you go now, he dies for nothing. We end this. Now." Together they turned. Valari surged forward with wings of flame, spinning into the air with her blades drawn. Nisari ducked low, her movements fluid, daggers flashing toward the enemy's knees. They attacked like poetry written in fury, twin, songs of vengeance against their maker. But Varuth was no mere soldier. Every cut they landed vanished in seconds. His flesh stitched itself together mid-strike, and his laughter echoed inside their skulls. "You are not queens," he hissed. "You are echoes, beautiful echoes of my will." Kale, bleeding and broken, forced himself to stand. Something burned in his palm, the obsidian shard. The throne's resonance, he gripped it tight, and with a roar of pain and memory, he activated it. The shard pulsed like a dying star, and then flared with unbearable heat. A wave of force exploded from him, halting everyone, even Varuth. His wounds glowed with golden cracks. His eyes flickered with something ancient and wild. Power, not of machines, but of inheritance. Buried deep in Sindari law, one clause had never been spoken aloud. If the throne accepted a non-Sindari consort through fire, that consort could invoke the king's flame. A failsafe, meant to destroy any who would enslave the royal bloodline again. Now that fire was in Kale. He walked forward, every step echoing. Like a drumbeat of judgment, the shard in his hand blazed. "By your own laws," he said, voice layered with echoes of 100 fallen kings. "By the throne you twisted, by the blood you defiled, you are sentenced." He raised the shard and pointed it at Varuth. Burn. The High Ascendant opened. His mouth to scream, but there was no sound. Light consumed him, not fire, not energy, something older. A reckoning. His form shattered into silver ash and memories and was swept away by the wind like so much smoke. Silence fell. The clouds broke. The world exhaled. Valari collapsed to her knees beside Kale, catching his head in her arms. "You fool," she whispered, brushing blood from his face. "You nearly killed yourself," he smiled faintly. Still here. Nisari knelt on his other side, pressing her forehead gently against his. "You stubborn human. What did we ever do to deserve you?" Kale blinked at them both. "I think I still owe you another drink." They stared at him, then laughed, wet, aching, relieved laughter. In the days that followed, emissaries came from the outer colonies, carrying old flags and broken hopes. The tale spread like fire. The High Ascendant was dead. The Empire had fallen not to rebellion, but to love. In the same cave where 1,000 Sindari royals had once been broken, 2 new queens were crowned. Not by genetics, not by blood, but by will. At their side stood a man who had once bought them for a single drink in a forgotten town. Now, he wore no crown, only the weight of their hands in his, the light of their eyes watching him. That night, under a sky reborn with auroras, Valari wrapped her arms around Kale's waist and whispered, "You know you're ours now. Forever." "Didn't plan on leaving," he murmured. Nisari kissed his shoulder. "And you still owe us. You bought us both with 1 drink." He chuckled, heart full. "Guess I'm yours on credit then." "You're ours by choice," Valari said. "By fire," Nisari added, and Kale, who once thought himself a nobody drifting through stars, now knew he belonged to everything, and they would never, ever let him go.